Good morning, everyone. Welcome to a so-called Asakai of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. I'm Andrew Horvat. I'm an ex-president and old fogey. And it's a great honor for me to be able to, and a pleasure, of course, to be able to welcome back Philippe Riès, who is a former member of this club, former bureau chief of AFP in Tokyo, and also a man of the moment because he has had a long-standing association with Carlos Ghosn, an individual about whom I need not say anything very much because you all know. And also, likewise, I need not say very much about Philippe because I think most of you know him very well. But I should add that Philippe has had a long-standing association with Carlos Ghosn, which resulted in a book. And so therefore he knows a lot more than virtually than I'd say anyone else in this room. And also he has recently met Carlos. So I think you came to hear him, not me. So with that very short introduction, let me hand over the mic to Philippe, who will give you an update on a situation that you're all interested in. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be back in Tokyo and at the club. I'm going to do today something I usually don't do. That is read out my preliminary remarks, because thanks to the technology, the message is going to be circulated across the world. We will look for that. And the message, I must humbly say, is quite important because, in fact, there has been very few voice raised in favor or in support of Carlos Ghosn, even less so in France, one of his home countries, than in Japan, where he's in the situation we all know. Contrary to what my good old friend Andrew said last year here, in a different occasion, I've never been the voice of Carlos Ghosn. But since he has been effectively silenced until now by the intimidation coming from the Tokyo Public Prosecutor Office, I do have a few things to say in support of him. Besides, as with other issues in economics, my forte, I assume to be a contrarian. And then there is another thing I would add, is that I understand, or I've been told, that some people do not realize that I've left AFP, I resigned from AFP more than 10 years ago. So what I could say or write about the case do not reflect in any way the views, well, that's going to be even more difficult, the views of the wire service. Now, be forwarded that I will not shy away from some touchy question, touchy particularly here in Japan. For instance, has been Carlos Ghosn discriminated against by the Japanese judicial system? Short answer, yes, certainly, among his peers at the top of the business world. On the other hand, Mr. Hiroto Saikawa, the current head of Nissan, has been certainly discriminated favorably and in a very big way, and we can come back to that. Second, what is fair to assimilate the case to a Moscow or Prague Stalinist show trial, as I did in the FT op-ed piece I wrote? Short answer, absolutely yes, and I stick to it. Thirdly, can Carlos Ghosn expect a fair trial in Japan? Well, my answer to that question is another question. Why would he? And by the way, I've had circulated, I think, a flyer about a symposium I'm going to taking part this Saturday in Tokyo. It's all in Japanese, organized by the largest lawyer association in Japan about the so-called hostage justice system. And the other speaker will be Mr. Takano, one of Carlos Ghosn's lawyers. And you're all welcome. And the media is absolutely welcome to attend this symposium. It's on Saturday afternoon. Another point. What sort of role exactly has the French government played as Renault's major and rather invasive shareholder in the unraveling of the alliance? I would say nefarious, as usual. There is in the case a very big personal responsibility of the current President of the Republic of France, because the whole story started back in 2014 and 15 when he was the economy minister in the François Hollande administration and sought to re-establish the state, the French government authority over Renault. And that started to worry, and rightly so, the Japanese side. Besides, as we know, we learn more and more about what went out since basically the spring of last year. We see a deep involvement of French officials in the whole proceeding, starting, I think, with a key visit that took place in April 2018, when Mr. Martin Vial, who is the administrator of a very, very large public sector, including, of course, Renault, came to visit Tokyo and had a personal encounter with Mr. Arinada, we all know played a key role in the whole conspiracy. One can conclude the French government, for reasons we could discuss later, in fact gave the green light to the judicial elimination of Carlos Ghosn. And now, and in the coming months and years, the price will be paid by Renault. Finally, was the Japanese government so closely linked to Nissan's history from the very beginning, aware or even involved in the palace coup set up by the old Nissan gang, now in control of the company? Well, that's a question that remains open, and I think the Tokyo-based media, Japanese and foreign, should try to sort out. But then I would like to briefly look at the Nissan scandal from a larger perspective. First, as two countries deeply hostile, that's the case of France, or reluctant, the case of Japan, to embrace globalization. France and Japan have been really unlikely bedfellows in the alliance. That Ghosn, more than anybody else, made it work for 20 years, remains a unique performance. Neither in France nor in Japan, Ghosn, that I call one le métèque in the ancient Greece acception of the word. For those not familiar, a métèque in Athens was a foreigner, that is, a citizen of another Greek country, enjoying certain rights to do business, for instance, but could not become a proper citizen, allowed to go to the agora to take decision on the way of life of the city. And Ghosn never made any effort, maybe it was a mistake, to join the local nomenclatura, either in France or in Japan, two countries where the nomenclatura is extremely well entrenched and powerful. Besides, before joining Renault in 1996, people should remember that he grew up as an industry leader at the Michelin Tire Company. And Michelin is renowned to be a fiercely independent company which keeps politicians and their small world at arm's length. Now, and we can witness that almost every day, with Ghosn gone, it looks like we are back to the good old day of the Régie Nationale des Usines Renault, when it was a state-owned company and the political power was ultimately in charge. Very briefly, if we had time, I know it's a concern for many, many people here and in France. Even more, I could give a lecture on contemporary monetary policy, because, by the way, that's my forte, and the general debasement of currencies. The main reason why the paycheck of top managers, like so many other things, think of real estate, for instance, have been inflated to insane levels in many, many places. My favorite case is the Brazilian soccer player called Neymar. The guy was purchased for 220 million euros by Paris Saint-Germain. It's Qatari money, and has spent the last 3 years hardly playing any game. He's either injured or recuperating from injury in his home country, Brazil, and now wants to leave to go back to Barcelona. Of course, Paris Saint-Germain will not let him go without getting the money back. Incidentally, I checked recently, I discovered that the compensation for Didier Leroy, the number 2 at Toyota Motor Company, last year topped 1 billion a year. That is 3 times Akios Toyota own package. So there is actually a market for top-level managers. There might not be a market for the Hiroto Saikawas of the world. That's a point to make. Another interesting point is the so-called imbalance within the alliance between Renault and Nissan. Fair enough. Even when Louis Schweitzer thought about the formation of the alliance and taking basically control of Nissan, Nissan was bigger than Renault. Always has been. I mean, I remember Louis Schweitzer telling me at the time that the window of opportunity he used to close the operation were the 3 months during which the Renault stocks had more value than the Nissan stock. So it's really nothing new. But what is the imbalance coming from right now? Basically from what Ghosn achieved for Nissan. An example, he directed the negotiation on the Dongfeng joint venture for Nissan with Chinese premier Zhu Rongji, and he personally rescued the negotiation to take over Siam Motor in Thailand, being mismanaged by his Nissan subordinates. And there is other case, of course. Now, those 2 companies, Dongfeng and Siam Motor, produced last year 2.4 of the 5.6 million units that Nissan counts as Nissan's produced vehicles, and have provided virtually all the net growth in sales of Nissan over the past decade. So the imbalance is really the result of the good job that Carlos Ghosn did for the Nissan Motor Company. Another point that I'd like to single out, but I think it's a long-term perspective that we should always keep in mind, not being driven only by the day-to-day reporting. It's not by accident that the auto industry is called the industry of industries, because it doesn't deal only with materials of machines, because it's not only a huge industry involving millions of workers, hundreds of millions of clients, but because it's also built up on emotion and even passion. I mean, you have still people in this world, I don't know how it's going to last, that have passion for cars. And not only men's. Well, that's a remark I should retract. Sorry. And the motor industry, that very peculiar industry, has not been built over the ages by the Hiroto Saikawa of the world, even in Japan. Think of Eiji Toyoda, that, if my memory is correct, was nicknamed the Emperor, and for good reason. Or the inflexible, domineering, and visionary Shoichiro Honda, the founder of Honda. Or, again, my favorite example, Taiichi Ohno, the father of the so-called machine that changed the world, of MIT fame, an authoritarian and often ill-tempered leader. So much for the so-called Japanese-style consensus. By the way, it's largely a fiction. That now seems to inspire Mr. Jean-Baptiste Sénard, the man the French government handpicked to replace Carlos Ghosn and his alleged dictatorial power. If Nissan Motor was such a mess in 1999, it was largely because a weak management could not drive a fractious company. Thirdly, it's not the end but quite close, as in any major event, we journalists cannot avoid questioning the performance of the media. I found it, from the very beginning, rather ironical that the Japanese mainstream medias, especially the TV networks, that created in the first place the semi-god-like figure of Ghosn-san after he turned around Nissan, embarked almost immediately from November 19 last year in a campaign of character assassination, orchestrated by the sinister alliance, a very strong one, alliance, I repeat, between the old Nissan gang and the Tokyo Public Prosecutor Office. Just my own experience. I gave twice a 1-hour interview to both TBS and NHK. The NHK team traveled all the way to Lisbon, where I live. What resulted from the interview was, in both cases, 30 seconds. Simple reason. You will say, well, that's TV. No, very simple reason. They could not leverage any words against Carlos Ghosn. That was not fitting in their campaign. Secondly, the description of the greedy foreign boss we are now getting on an almost daily basis, who himself nor his children that were raised the 4 children were raised in Japan, never loved Japan, like Saikawa once said in a shameless attempt to play up the nationalist card. This image opposed to the virtuous and frugal Japanese business executive it's a joke. We all know this, and it's a bad one. Thirdly, fed at times by daily leaks. Actually, we used to, between us, the few people working in group about the case, used to call that the daily leak. And we expected one every morning. The coverage of the case here and elsewhere has looked largely biased in favor of the accusation. In part, of course, because the defense has yet today to remain silent for one major reason. They don't have actually access to any factual evidence, that is documents, that supposedly sustain the accusation. By the way, it is not better in France, where the Renault management, the new management, is now actively engaged as well in the campaign to collect dirt on Ghosn. That's their motto, as the case of the so-called alleged Mazars report demonstrates. And if I can, I will do a few things about it in the Q&A session. And finally, this is very strange to observe that while Nissan is leaking, or has been leaking for months, dirt on Ghosn, because it's exactly what it is, none of the accusers is available for any interview or is answering any question. What you have of Nissan is a sort of human robot. I forgot his name. Well, I know the English name. There should be a Japanese one, I suppose, that parrots the same empty words after each leaked revelation. Nissan do not comment on ongoing judiciary investigation. That's it. In fact, and that was the first thing I did when I heard of the news on November 19th, the whole kabuki started with Sakawa's initial press conference, where he, after launching all those investigations, he refused to answer any specific question. And of course, the staging of the Ghosn arrest for TV Asahi. As we all know, Ghosn was not in the plane when he was arrested. Finally, looking ahead briefly. As of today, about $16 billion shareholders' value at Nissan and Renault combined has evaporated since November 19, and I can tell you it's only the beginning. The statu quo at the Alliance, which comprise 8 large companies, not 3, not only Nissan, not only Renault, not only Mitsubishi, but as I said, Dongfeng, Avtovaz, Xiam, Samsung, Dacia, was over time unsustainable. To look at the financial structuring of the Alliance is a job some people know much better than I do, that Ghosn started in 2005. One big reason he could not move ahead was the presence of the French state in the Renault capital. It was not sustainable. It's like riding a bicycle. If you stop pedaling, you just fall down. Second point in this, looking ahead, Nissan's expenses in the hunt for dirt on Ghosn are suspected of running into the hundreds of millions of dollars. I can provide details. When what is at stake with Carlos Ghosn alleged misdeeds would be around 30 million, if guilty. And of course, that's a big if, as he continues to deny and strenuously each and every accusation. Fourth, During the coming upheaval in the global motor industry, who is now facing the biggest change since his birth in the late 19th century, we can be sure that we will see many companies falter. And the members of the Unraveling Alliance do not look to me like long-term survivors. And by the way, the condition accepted by the current manager to sell Renault to the Agnelli family do not bode well. We should go back to that in the discussion, if possible. And finally, as we all know, mergers of equal, the word that Jürgen Schrempp used for the failed merger between Daimler and Chrysler, are as real as flying pigs. And the final word would be in memory of a great car guy who passed away last week, Lee Iacocca. In his memoir, published in 1984, humbly titled Iacocca, the man who passed away last week envisioned, and to my recollection, it was really the first time, a global motor company operating on equal basis in what were at the time the three dominant automobile markets, the US, Europe, and Japan. There was no China back in the early 80s. At the Renault-Nissan Alliance, that vision of a global motor company was taking shape. I believe it's over now. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Philippe. We'll take questions from the floor. Please raise your hand, and I think there will we be taking the microphone around, or yes, I think Ito-san, are you going to, or is there a mic there standing there? There's a mic there. Okay, fine. So please go to the mic, identify yourself, and we will take questions from journalists first. So yes.
Okay. Anthony Rowley, South China Morning Post, etc. Philippe, thank you very much for a fascinating discourse. You mentioned the amount of money that this whole affair is costing Nissan Renault. I've heard that Nissan Renault has already spent some $200 million, approximately, on this inquiry, and those expenditures are set to rise dramatically as it continues its forensic search of emails and so on. On top of that, Nissan Renault has lost some $16 billion, I think, off its capitalization. Mm-hmm. Its profits have plunged, and generally it's not seen to be in good shape. I wonder why Nissan Renault shareholders have not made more of this. I mean, how much longer can the company continue to pursue this policy, which is draining it of money, in pursuit of very nebulous objectives? So I'd like to hear your view on that. And secondly, dare Japan let Renault cars go and go? Or are they afraid that he will launch massive claims for damages in various courts around the world? I'd like to hear your view on that too. Thank you.
I'd like rather answer first because, okay. First question, not very long. Look out for the coming Nissan results. I think it's next week. The stock is sustained apparently as of today for two reasons. It's down to about 700 yen. One reason is a sort of general reason. As we all know, the Bank of Japan is supporting the stock market on an almost daily basis. So Nissan stock has other Japanese stocks. Second, I'm not sure of the word in English. The coupon is coming. I mean, the dividend is coming, and it's very high because the stock is very low. The dividend is going to be very high. I'm told around 6%.
It's still very high.
Yeah, it's still very high. For how long, again, we'll see. It might disappear completely next year. So shareholders tend to keep their stocks as long as they wait for the dividend to be paid off. In any case, Carlos Ghosn's succession would have been complicated because of the central figure he was for all those companies. They mismanage it in a way that is absolutely appalling. And they are not discovering there is basically no issue, there is no solution. There is the reason why, people should remember, the very reason why the Japanese government in 1999 allowed Louis Schweitzer to build up that alliance. It's where there was no Japanese solution. There was no solution inside Japan for Nissan. It's very complicated to merge big Japanese companies anyway. People will tell you that at the Bank of Tokyo, Mitsubishi, whatever the new name is, the two hierarchies are still pretty much there. The old Bank of Tokyo, the old Mitsubishi Bank. In a way, it was easier to do it with a foreign company. So the re-Japanization of Nissan that Mr. Nakanishi talked about here shortly after the arrest of Carlos Ghosn is a pipe dream, in my opinion. It's going to end in a disaster. Regarding the expenses, well, you gave the figure, Anthony. As far as I know, they are correct. How long it's going to last, but it's also a huge amount of time. The top management at the company is spending almost 60% of his time, I'm told, on the Ghosn case, on the whole thing. They do not work to build up, to reform the company or to put it back on track. In the EFT piece, I made that comparison with the Moscow show trial because of my own experience in jail in Poland as a journalist in the late 70s. But there's another interesting dimension to the whole Stalinist process at Nissan and Renault. It's the purge of top people that are leaving, are being pushed away or are resigning. And it's great. It's fantastic for the rest of the motor industry in the world. Jose Munoz is now the number 2 at Hyundai. The guy who used to run the Infiniti brand has been poached by Jeep of the FCA group. So on and so forth. The communication staff here in Tokyo is being eliminated, replaced by Japanese people. So the weakening of the companies is absolutely dramatic, and of course, will have very serious consequences.
Okay. I think, yes, okay. So next question, please.
Hi, my name is Yuri Hump. I'm an independent researcher. I'm interested. It's unsurprising about the Japanese media acting as it does, given that the prosecutors are allegedly leaking a lot of information. But I'm just interested to hear why you think the French media are so ambivalent, and why the current Renault management is so interested in sort of digging the dirt on Ghosn. What is the upside for the French side, especially for Renault and the French government, in doing that?
Okay, it's a bit complicated. As I said, first of all, if you look at the general background. Carlos Ghosn doesn't have a great number of friends in the French nomenclatura. You know his personal history. He was born in Brazil from a family of Lebanese origin, moved to Lebanon very quickly when he was 5, got educated by the Jesuit in French in Lebanon, moved to Paris to join the very prestigious École Polytechnique, and went on to go to the École des Mines. But I'm always surprised to find out that a lot of French people, educated French people, and journalists do believe that since he graduated through École des Mines, he is a member of the very prestigious and powerful Corps des Mines, the Corps of the Mines Engineers. He is not. Because to join the Corps, you have to be a French national. and Carlos Ghosn was not a French national when he graduated from Polytechnique and l'École des Mines. He only became a French national after joining Renault. So he's not part of the caste of the upper crust of the French establishment. Second, he has never been a popular figure in France, unlike in Japan. He was actually a hate figure. I mean, it's absolutely striking that when the alliance became in 2017 the largest seller of car in the world, it was almost a footnote in French papers, because that was spring, so after, I suppose, the Nissan, the close of the Japanese fiscal year, that those figures were announced, and we were coming into the what we call in the French media a marronnier. A marronnier is a boring subject. It's a subject that keeps popping up every year at the same time. And the marronnier was Ghosn's compensation, Ghosn's outrageous compensation. The guy was more well paid than any other French boss, because he had a salary at Nissan, a salary at Renault, and then a salary at Mitsubishi. That's what the big story, you know. There is in France a sort of old Marxist mentality. Those people don't like money. Money is almost a dirty word. And they thought that was really the most interesting story. Or would the shareholder react to the fact that Carlos Ghosn was making so much money? By the way, it's an interesting point I made in all those interviews that were never used. Would Carlos Ghosn be the greedy mercenary that everyone seems to want to depict today? He would have left in 2009. He would have joined General Motors, a job he has been offered by the Barack Obama administration. Steven Rattner, I think, were the guy in charge. And we, the same small group of people, I mean, we calculated that his net worth today would not be the $100 million that Forbes estimated, I think, last year, but about 4 times more. He would have been paid about $20 million a year, like Miss Marie Barra last year. He would have benefited of the incredible turnaround of General Motors, that was bankrupt in 2009, had to be nationalized. And cerise sur le gâteau, as we say in France, he would not have spent 130 days in jail in Tokyo, and would not be now in a situation when he is not allowed even to talk to his wife or live with his wife, which I think is absolutely outrageous. So that's part of the answer. Now, why would the French state do all that? That's a big mystery, you know. Well, it's a habit. They mismanage their assets, and they have been doing it for decades. Remember Crédit Lyonnais, a state-owned bank that costed the French taxpayer around 80 billion French francs. That would be something like that, more than 15 billion euros, something like around 15 billion euros. Remember Areva, the nuclear group. The bill is now over 10 billion euros and counting. Remember Renault, before it has been privatized. Renault, back in, I don't remember, I remember the name of the boss, Vernet Paliez, lost 12 billion French francs. That was the largest ever loss by a French industrial company at the time. I think Areva is doing much worse, but of course, as I said, there has been a huge debasement of currencies over those 30 years or 40 years. So it's an habit. You know, the French government still, and the right or left, no difference. They claim, some of them, like the current ones, claim to be liberal in the European sense, free markets. They're not. They continue to believe that jobs are created by state decision, not by clients, markets, and investment. And so they were looking at Ghosn's succession. They wanted to reassert the control of the state over the company since he became, after turning around Nissan, since he became the head of Renault, Ghosn, in fact, has been the main guarantor against this invasive presence of the French government in the business. So they thought that with Ghosn gone, they could reassert their influence on the Renault company. And that, as I said, in 2014 and 15, started to worry the Japanese management, because rightly so, I have a lot of criticism for them, but rightly so, they don't wanted the French state to run their business, directly or indirectly. And very likely, as I said in the 30 seconds that was used by NHK, one day or another we will know the whole story. We will know the truth about the whole story, even if it takes years. But the Japanese side came to realize that getting Ghosn out was probably their best chance to avoid those interferences from the French state. I'm not saying that there is no other issues, personal issues, whether Mr. Saikawa was going to be fired because Nissan's performance was falling like a stone, or another, I don't know. And if I would know, I would not tell you. But I think that's the main argument. And on the other hand, on the French side, they failed to realize that if they do not manage properly Ghosn's succession, that was in the plan anyway, because he's 65, was not going to stay forever, they would lose the main conduct, not of their influence, but of the Renault influence over Nissan. And over the years, whatever you can think, it has been a good influence. As I said, they were unlikely bedfellows. The working out of the alliance was a daily miracle. It's never been easy. It started with purchasing and functions that are relatively straight, but I'm told that when they came to what they call the integrated engineering, it's became much, much more complicated because the two cultures are not very similar, because they're, it's, even if it's among engineers and researchers, the communication is not always very easy. And of course, partly because also Nissan's engineering side has always been the strongest side of the company, the dominant side. And it's anecdotal, but I found out only during this trip that there is a Nissan museum in Yokohama. And that's very interesting. It tells you almost everything you should to know about Nissan Motor Company. It's not an auto museum, it's an engine museum. The heart of Nissan is building engines, and for years Nissan claimed to have the best six-cylinder engine of the whole motor industry worldwide, and they were very, very proud of that, and it was a very good engine, actually. So that was always has been extremely difficult, and that, as I said, that Ghosn managed to run it and to make it work for 20 years was almost a miracle. Whether you can find out another miracle makers at the Alliance, I very much doubt.
Yes, the lady in yellow.
Can you tell us, like...
Just a second, could you please wait? And identify yourself, please.
Yeah, Yuri Kageyama with the Associated Press.
Okay.
Can you tell us, like, how much you know about Mr. Ghosn's physical, mental, other condition? When you last met him, when you last talked to him, what his state of mind might be as far as his strategy in battling the allegations? Also, anything you can tell us that you know and how you have had contact with him. And also, what happened with that abruptly canceled news conference, if you know if there was a news conference? And also, he told us in the video thing that that's the last time we heard anything from him directly. He said that there was a conspiracy, but what is your take on that? You just told us that he was the main person that kept the two sides, the two unlikely bedfellows, kind of in a compatible situation. But what was that? What was he planning? What was the compatible merger that he was planning? I mean, he never told us in that video. If you'll tell us.
Okay. All I can tell you, I met him twice this time. Actually, it's a point I like to make. I'm not a friend of Carlos Ghosn. I may become one through this crisis. We had a very solid, clear-cut, open, professional relationship between a top manager and a journalist when I was the AFP bureau chief here. We came out with that book, and I stopped seeing it or talking to it for 15 years until his arrest. I met him for the second time last night, or last evening. He's in good shape physically. He said he came out of the prison in very, very poor physical condition. He said he recovered to about 90% of his physical capacities, and he's working on it. I found it mentally extremely strong, very combative. I was personally wondering whether the Carlos Ghosn of today was very different from the Carlos Ghosn I used to know back in between 1999 and 2003. Because, he had become a worldwide public figure, was making a lot of money. Basically, it's the same man. He's very straightforward, very conscious of the time, he's dealing with issue in a very effective and rapid way. the journalist that came to interview him in jail got exactly the same impression. You know, they had 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and he wanted to use that time in the most effective way. He's very much the same man. He has not changed a lot. I mean, the money has not got to his brain as people suppose. All this talk about hubris, there might be a dimension of it, but it's, if it's the one, it's very limited. As for the allegation against him, he is adamant that they are groundless, and he wants to be able to talk about it as soon as possible. But now he's being very cautious, so are his lawyer and his family, because the last time he wanted to talk to you, he got rearrested. And I don't think it was a coincidence. I mean, nobody can believe that. So when will he be able to do that? I have absolutely no idea. And because I knew the question was coming, I asked him specifically yesterday evening about this cancelled press conference. Well, you know, what happened, my understanding is what happened is that his appeal against the, as I say, absolutely scandalous condition of his bail. I mean, one is absolutely scandalous, that he cannot leave and talk to his wife. His wife has nothing to do with the accusation. I mean, most of the the charges are back when he was not married to her, and she was not living with him. And this is, the whole thing is ridiculous. The whole bail condition are part of the process to try to break him. That's it. I mean, that's exactly the Stalinist show trial that is going on in Japan regarding Carlos Ghosn. And by the way, of course, it's not only Carlos Ghosn. It has been used again, hundreds of convicts. So the idea that they would, and I think the idea came from this lawyer, that it would be good to protest against that, the fact that the third appeal has been rejected. It was not his idea. And then the family and the PR people thought it was not a very good strategy. And they cancel it. I mean, he's aware that this has caused trouble. I myself, it's incredible. I myself was in Portugal. You know, I'm sorry retired. I don't look like, but I'm sorry retired. I was about to go to play golf when I received, I think that was from you, Andrew.
Yes.
The message from the club. It was 6:30 in the morning, maybe in Lisbon. And immediately after that, I received a phone call from a French journalist from RTL who was down in Osaka for the G20. Telling me, what's going on? Ghosn is going to speak to the FCCG. Should I go to Tokyo? Well, I said, I don't know more than you do. If he is talking, yes, you better got in the first Shinkansen to Tokyo, because it's a much bigger story than the bloody G20. And that's it. And then came the news that it's not going to be Ghosn himself, but the lawyer, and then the whole thing was cancelled. That's what I can tell you. But the root of the story is the fact that the defense in this country cannot act as it should be in a normal judiciary process. You know, they don't have access to the evidence. He cannot talk to the press. He cannot defend himself publicly because there is a sort of épée de Damocles, I mean, over his head, that he's going to be rearrested. Of course, the chance that he's going to be rearrested are getting slimmer, because obviously, despite, Anthony, the hundreds of millions they are spending and will spend further to examine 20 years of documents and accountability, yeah, they want to go back all the way to 1999. They're obviously not finding anything new. The accusation is using ways that in any other judicial process will lead to to disregarding those charges. One thing I would ask the Tokyo-based media, because frankly speaking, I will not make many friends, but the coverage has been pretty poor. The famous computer, where is he coming from? It's the Tokyo prosecutor guys, their minions that went to Lebanon to find out the computer? Come on. Where is the computer coming from? How was it obtained? There was a requisition order? It was based on legal basis? Or was it stolen? And by who? That's the type, if I was a reporter here, that's the type of question I would ask myself. I would try to find out. The same way I would try to find out, as I said, when was the Japanese government made aware of what was going on at Nissan? Was it in the spring of 2018? Was there a political decision? What was the connection between Mr. Saikawa and the Japanese government? When I say the Japanese government, as we all know, the Japanese government does not exist. What exists are different factions, different grouping, different administration, different bureaucracies, with a thought of authority at the top, but it's not like France, where basically the president make decision on everything or ever little. But that's the sort of question I'm still looking for answers. I hope I answered your question.
What is the merger that you...
Can you please wait for the microphone?
Yeah. No, you know, it never was, as far as I know, but that's an answer. There never was any question about a full merger in a sense that the two companies would really become one. The idea was that the capitalist structure over those 8 companies, one very simple, why was it that always, despite the fact that the volume of business is almost the same, the combined valuation in the stock market of Renault plus Nissan was so low compared to Toyota? Toyota might not be the best example because we all know that Toyota is Toyota. Every Japanese household that owns stocks owns Toyota. Okay. But why? The difference was absolutely massive, 1 to 3 times. One good reason that nobody could invest in the alliance. You could buy either Renault or Nissan stocks, but you could not invest in the alliance. So the idea was to create a financial structure consolidating all those shareholdings, including Dongfeng, Avtovaz, and so on, make it in a financial instrument in which first people could invest, shareholders could invest, and second, that could, and that's a very important point, could be used to help join other partners. I had that discussion long time ago with him when we were working on the book. He always thought, his US experience with Michelin was a very important one for him. Very important. You have to remember that he went for Michelin in the US to consolidate 2 business, the Michelin North America operation and Goodrich. So that's where he learned the first time how to integrate, to consolidate 2 different businesses. And anyway, it was a very important experience for him, for his family. as was, of course, as were the 15 years spent at Michelin. That is a very, as I said, very exceptional, particular company. His idea always has been that the alliance should get an American leg. So the alliance was an uncompleted, was an unfinished business. Nissan, Renault did not exist in the US. The Nissan share of the market is 6-7%, 5%. That was too small. This is still the second largest car market in the world, North America, if you include Canada. So that's, and then, if you want, for instance, to take control of FCA, you can do it with money, but if you can do it with a stock, it's much better. And this holding company, let's call it holding company, would have provided that instrument. So that was
Like a U.S. based.
but going to a full merger, in a sense of really, would have been a nonsense. It would have been contrary to the whole philosophy of the alliance, that you integrate, but you try to keep the personalities of the two companies independent, because that's how it works.
Just 1 second, please, Mr. Gotto. First of all, it's working press first. Second, could you please? I know that you want to do. I know you want to do follow-ups, but are there any further? First of all, it's now 9:10, and I think some of you are actually do work. So may I suggest that we conclude the formal part of this discussion? Those people who have to leave should be allowed to leave, and those who would wish to ask further questions from our guest, I think our guest will be fairly generous with his time. So.
Can go on forever.
And it can't go on forever, but
No,
can I ask you if you're willing to stay for another half an hour or so?
Yeah, absolutely, okay, no problem.
Sure.
Absolutely no problem.
So if you must go, please go. In the meantime, please, this is a press club, so I have to give a working press precedence. I'm sorry, you're from AP, right?
Yes.
Yes. Can I ask someone else for some? Anthony, do you have a follow-up that you'd like to ask?
I have various questions, but I'll defer to other members.
Okay. Who else has not? Working press has not asked a question yet.
Well, can I just? Sorry.
Okay, sure.
I did actually ask the question. You were very agnostic on whether Mr. Ghosn would get a fair trial in Japan, but what would you speculate are his chances, if any, of being acquitted, and what are the factors that argue against him being acquitted?
You're not a judge, right?
Well, the stakes are very high. Suppose he's acquitted. What about the whole judicial process and the position of the prosecutor? That is being challenged in Japan by many people. And I talked about that seminar that's on Saturday. This is organized by the largest lawyer association. So I discovered, and I was confirmed, that the whole prosecutor system was set up by the Americans after the war for the Tokyo trial. So one might ask a question. It's now 70 years or more. Maybe it's time to reform that great American legacy to Japan. Second, don't you think that if Carlos Ghosn would be freed and released of all charges, it would be his turn to take Renault and Nissan and maybe the Japanese government to court? He can. You know, in France we had that crazy case of that guy Bernard Tapie. He was granted 45 million in moral prejudice, compensation, not prejudice. I'm not quite sure of the word in English. He had not spent a single day in jail. It was purely financial matters. Carlos Ghosn stayed in jail around 130 days. He was stripped of his position, of his honor, of his reputation. He's forbidden to leave the country, forbidden to live a normal life with his wife. He could ask for a huge amount of money. So that's another very high stake. Now, has the whole proceeding be fair to him as of today? Well, in my opinion, certainly not. Certainly not. I mean, this is, the lawyer have no access to the documentation of the charges, and I'm told they might not even have access to them during the trial itself. I mean, in what sort of world are we living here? The rule of law defines a democracy. The rule of law defines a democracy. There is no perfect democracy, and France is certainly not one. And as Churchill famously said, it's the worst of the regime, bar all of the system, bar all the others. But the rule of law and the working of the judicial system is at the heart of the rule of law, defines the democracy. Japan has to ask itself, what sort of democracy allows the prosecutors to behave the way they are behaving? None. That was I made I stick to what I said about the Moscow show trial.
Okay, thank you. You've answered my question.
Okay, so if there are no further questions from the working press, Goto-san, one question, please. No comments, just one question. Thank you.
Mitsuya Goto, now a life member of this club and ex-Nissan executive. And I retired from Nissan in 1989, but I kept in touch with Carlos Ghosn. But anyway, the story, there was a story that Fiat Chrysler had proposed set up joint operations alliance with Renault, and the French government no.
You can sit down, Goto-san, please.
Saikawa, president, CEO of Nissan, is still open to that idea. Now, do you think that will happen? I reported to work in Brussels in March 1983, and around 1981, Ishihara, then president of Nissan, said, since France and Italy restrict the import of Japanese cars, let's set up a joint venture with Alfa Romeo. The company is called ARNA, A-R-N-A, Alfa Romeo Nissan Auto Hikori. And we built a Pausa body plant in Avellino near Naples. And the completed bodies are taken to Alfa Romeo's major assembly plant in Pomigliano near Milan. When the first ARNA car came off the assembly line, there was a great fanfare and fireworks. But when the car was first sold in England, we discovered that in some cars, engine oil leaked and the clock was installed upside down. and the indoor panels were in the wrong color. But so Ishihara and I called on Massachetti, Chairman, CEO of Alfa Romeo, several times, but in vain. But fortunately, several years later, Fiat absorbed
Alfa Romeo. And almost
Alfa
killed,
Romeo
almost killed
nowadays
it.
is
Goto-san.
doing very well in Japan.
Thank you very much for that useful comment.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All due credit to you, Goto-san. Carlos Ghosn did not start the international expansion of Nissan. You did. You're almost the father of Smyrna, that is now the largest auto plant in the US, all brands combined. Was the Fiat FCA offer a good one? Frankly, I don't think so. Not in general terms. In those specific terms, first of all, the valuation of Renault was ridiculous, unacceptable. Second, I'm still wondering whether the Agnelli family has a long-term industrial strategy or just a wealth management strategy. You know, they sold Magneti Marelli, who really was one of the jewel, and so much that the world, the auto industry worldwide will rely more and more on components makers, whether batteries and so the whole picture is changing. They did a spin-off of Ferrari. Are they really long-term interested in staying in the car business? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. On those valuations, certainly not. Now, you would say, since, as I said before, Ghosn always wanted an American leg to the alliance, it is a port of entry to the US with basically two brands, Ram and Jeep. Chrysler, well. Is it the right one? Is it worth the price? I don't know. That has to be, I'm not qualified to answer those questions. As for the European operation, Fiat is really weak. I mean, I'm not really a car guy. As I said, I'm probably stronger in monetary policy and finance. But for my 70th birthday, that was last year, I made myself a nice gift. I bought a classic car. And it's one of the nicest sports car, small sports car, affordable sports car. Like the Nissan 240, the old Datsun 240, ever built by a car manufacturer. It's the Lancia Fulvia Coupe of 1973, and it's absolutely gorgeous. But not expensive. I mean, it's not a Ferrari GTO. I mean, you don't need to be a billionaire to buy it. I mean, anyone can buy it. Then you need to know a bit of mechanics. That brand, with such a fantastic history, is just dead. They killed it. Fiat killed it. Alfa Romeo. You're saying, yeah, I heard that Alfa Romeo is doing well in Japan. They hired a guy from BMW to fix all those problems of reliability that are associated with Italian cars, and he did a good job. But it's a niche player. I mean, it's I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of cars they're buying. So that's my answer. The alliance needed an American leg. Certainly. Thirdly, is it possible really to combine the three? Well, let's first talk about the survival of the two, because that is what's at stake now. To me, the alliance is as good as dead. It might be a long, long agony, but it's going to die. Because obviously the Nissan management doesn't want the alliance to go forward. It wants the alliance to stay as it is, or even go back with more Japanese control over the Nissan Motor Corporation. And this is just impossible. This is not going to work.
Sorry, Ken, before you say something, I want to use the chair's prerogative because this wonderful Alfa Romeo Nissan, which Mr. Gupta talked about, when it came out, was called by a British journalist half a Romeo. Ken, your turn.
Thank you very much. Philippe, you spoke earlier about something the French
It's on.
something the French government did, some initiatives they took in 2014 under the, I guess you could call it leadership of Macron when he was Minister of the Economy, and how that declenched or triggered a process that ultimately led to the crisis and the Nissan scandal. Could you tell us a little bit about what actually happened? It's not clear for me. Maybe you could go over that and what Macron did and why there was a reaction, and then how that set things up for this crisis.
Okay, you have, as I said, these people, the French government, and it's an opinion shared by a large part of the public opinion, a majority part of the public opinion. They still continue to think that the state should have a hand in private businesses. And so after the case of these steelworks in the northern front that finally was closed, they looked for a way to increase the capacity of the French government to meddle into businesses, whether they are private or public. So they passed that so-called Florange law that would allow the French government to take stake in businesses and get double voting rights. I make it as simple and as clear-cut as possible because it's very complicated. And of course, they wanted that law to be taken into the Renault bylaws. And for that, and Carlos Ghosn, that dead against it, because as I said, he has been the guarantor of Renault's independence against the meddling of the French state and the French government since the very beginning. By the way, the reason why Louis Schweitzer was able to succeed in the Renault-Nissan alliance, unlike the failed Renault-Volvo merger, is because of this political connection, Schweitzer being the former chief of staff of Laurent Fabius, former finance minister and prime minister, secured an agreement from Lionel Jospin, the prime minister, the French prime minister at the time, that the French state will have no part of the business. They had some negotiation between the French and the Japanese government, of course, but it was basically to say, okay, it's up to you guys. Work out the deal, make it right, and we will give you the green light. It was the case for Métis at the time, I don't remember, and the French government. But that was once a sort of, it was really because of Schweitzer's very strong political connection that it was granted that leeway.
2014.
No, that was 1998. 2014, they wanted to revert that. I mean, they wanted again to become activist shareholders, not only in public-owned or partly public-owned companies like Renault, but in others as well. That is, if a company like ArcelorMittal wants to close a steelworks, the French state should be able to intervene, get voting rights one way or the other, and block what's going on. This is insane. This is complete insanity. But it's typically French, Of course, so they increase the state shareholding, they said it would be temporary in Renault. As you remember, they went up from 15% to 19.4%. Okay. And that started a big conflict in the alliance because the Japanese took it
The 19 to 20%.
the 20%, of course, because Nissan was kept at 15 with no voting rights at all, as we know.
And the French government went to 40.
Of course. So that started a very big row, that started to destabilize completely the alliance. And after that, and Macron was the economy minister in charge of the whole story. He is personally responsible. And he wants to avoid facing that responsibility. And that's one reason I'm telling here it again, I said it in France time and again on radio and TV, that the French government will not lift his little finger, not to support Carlos Ghosn, but to question the way he is being treated in Japan. They had to negotiate an exit to that mess. And as you know, well, Ken, the exit agreement is the famous Rama 2, the amended version of that secret agreement, designing the relationship between two listed companies, one on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, the other one on the French stock market. And this, by the way, is absolutely outrageous. Minority shareholders have no access, nor the public, nor the press, to the Rama. And those are two listed companies. I mean, this is beyond understanding. How is it that the stock market authorities, both in France and in Japan, allow this to happen? Incredible.
I just want to
And final word, as you know very well, as I wrote in the Financial Times, the Rama 2 reduced Renault to a sleeping partner at Nissan, not allowed to challenge any resolution coming from the board. With Ghosn gone, the guarantee was gone, and Renault is now a sleeping partner at Nissan. Period.
So this, sorry, I just want to check something. Ken alluded to this 2014 agreement in which Renault has 20%. Now, is this 20% now 20% or 40%?
Because they have double voting rights.
Oh, they had double voting rights, yes.
Now, this Rama is in effect right now?
Yeah, sure.
But in that case, does Renault have voting rights, period? No.
No, I mean...
The 2014 was a proposition. It didn't become a reality. Is that correct?
No. It became a reality. And then they went back to... They went from 15 to 19.4. Then 2 years later, they went back. But in the meantime, they wanted that because they wanted to have a majority in the general shareholders meeting to make pass the double voting rights.
Which did not pass.
No, but there was a compromise. They did not stay, but the compromise was first the amended Rama, and second the term of the renewal of Ghosn's final mandate. And the term of the renewal of Ghosn's final mandate also have been looked at from the Japanese side as the way that Ghosn, that was regarded as the guy that protected Nissan. As I said before, Ghosn both, on one side, protected Renault from the invasive influence of the French government, and was also, on the other hand, protecting also Nissan from any side effect of that French government presence.
Yes.
Exactly. And the Japanese side saw, that's one explanation, that Ghosn was being weakened, and that he was maybe becoming an agent of the French side. Something he never was. Actually, you know, the public opinion in France and in the media particularly, even in the economic media, was that all through his tenure, Ghosn was working more in favor of the Japanese side than Renault. They blamed him for being late in developing SUVs at Renault when the Qashqai was a bestseller in Europe. And they blame, it's very strange because he was, maybe because he got it right, he was criticized on both sides of the alliance for helping the other side. Because he tried always to keep that balance. And the Japanese came to think that, well, maybe in the current situation, if we get rid of Ghosn, we will be able to protect our independence. As I said, it's going to take a long time to sort out the whole functioning of what happened. But we're going to get the truth. We're going to get the truth. No question. I mean, no question.
Ken, does that answer your question?
It's a complicated question, but as I saw it, the French government increased their stake. Effectively, it was a backdoor, seen in Tokyo as a backdoor nationalization of the alliance. That then triggered a reaction. A war broke out. Macron signed an agreement which, clause number 1, said that the French, that Renault would never vote its stake in the shareholders' meeting where they have effectively a majority against the decision of the board. And secondly, that Renault would never increase its stake in Nissan, which if you could then change the structure of the board, reduce, Renault at that point had majority control of the board. If you could reduce the majority control of Renault by getting rid of Kelly and Ghosn, then you would have complete control of France's investment in Nissan, because France said, the French side agreed never to vote against the board, and they no longer controlled the board. So that's how Macron set this up. And effectively has lost control of the alliance that way.
Thanks. Would you like to give the next Asakai? Okay. Thank you. All right. Okay. Thank you. Any further questions, please? Okay. So, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't see you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. My name is William Cleary, and I'm a professor and also an attorney. I live in Hiroshima. I also am familiar with Carlos Ghosn's lawyers. Mm-hmm. I've worked with them on other cases before. Okay. One thing that came to mind, it's a technical point, but under Article 3 of the Japanese Penal Code is a special provision that applies for crimes committed outside Japan. So any of the potential crimes that were committed overseas that were not in Japan, he would not be subject to jurisdiction here because he's not Japanese. He doesn't have Japanese citizenship. That's one thing. Another thing is Hari Nada, the whistleblower. What was his role in this takedown of Carlos Ghosn? Thank you.
Well, you're making a point I made without knowing the technical details about that article. You know that anything that would have happened in Brazil, in Lebanon, in Holland, would be out of the Japanese jurisdiction. And that's something that should be made extremely clear going into the trial. Because that would be a violation not only of the Japanese judicial code, but of Carlos Ghosn's civil rights as a foreign citizen. Well, so thank you for, but that's well, I'm sorry, I forgot your second point.
The Harinada.
The Harinada. Well, whistleblower. I never thought a second that Harinada was a whistleblower. You know, look at all the. He's not a Snowden. He's not that. What was that guy? Who became a girl.
Yes, Chelsea.
No,
Yes.
no. Or the guy in the Clearstream scandal in France or in Europe and so on. No, Harinada is an executive vice president of Nissan Motor Corporation. He was a close aide to Carlos Ghosn. He was actually the head of legal affairs, if I remember correctly. This is no whistleblower. He's a member of the top management at Nissan Corporation. Interestingly, I was very skeptical about what my friend, old-timer in Japan, not at all linked to the case, but old-timer in Japan, former bankers, their perception was that it was a sort of revolt of the colonel. That is, it did not, and that Saikawa himself came into the loop very, very late. And I was telling me, in October, well, this is not how a Japanese corporation operates. That's, I mean, senior executive, but not the top level, will keep an operation secret from the top management for months and months. I said, this would not happen in a normal Japanese company. And then, thinking harder, I said, well, just forget. Nissan is not a normal Japanese company. I can explain at length why. Where Nissan was born. When, where. Nissan was created by the Japanese government in Manchuria, when the civil administrator of Manchuria was who? Kishi Nobusuke, the grandfather of Abe Shinzo. Shinto, sorry. Shinzo, I said Shinzo.
Shinto is a nice slip.
Okay. So, and then Nissan, of course, had been under foreign management for 20 years. So it's not a normal, whatever they want. They're not a normal, I mean, the ordinary Japanese company anymore. They never were. Not Toyota, not Honda, not Mazda, not Suzuki. Very different. Well, substantially different. So we can figure out what exactly was the role of Harinada, of the play bargain, how he would. One interpretation, of course, is that Nada was pressured by others based on the evidence they thought they had against Ghosn to play the role he accepted to play. He was instrumental in getting, for instance, in getting Greg Kelly here. His friend, Greg Kelly. He obviously negotiated a deal with the prosecutor. What sort of deal we'd like to know? Because in the US, they do it all the time, but those deals are public. You know, they're not secret. They are public. They're part of the proceedings. This is completely obscure. Nobody knows. I mean, no one journalist has seen any evidence. All we had were leaks. So-and-so did so-and-so. I spent 10 years with Mediapart, an investigating online journal. We always had materials, proof, evidence, tape recording, documents, letter, emails. They exist. Okay, where are they? Where are they? All we have is that what Nissan is giving up. As I wrote, I mean, there is no Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot at the TPPO. As we know, they work on based on they succeed based on confession. They do not investigate anything. Everything is coming from Nissan, and not from Renault on the French side. Well, that's a rough idea of how it. Now, why did it start? The general background is what we discussed already. With the Renault. The details, the day when the whole started, at what point, what level, in what way was the Japanese government involved, or was it completely kept out of in the dark, like Nissan by Nissan? I'm pretty skeptical, but that's all I can say. The work is going on. It might take years, but we will get to the bottom of that story. I can guarantee that.
Well, I think that we should call this to an end, otherwise we will soon have a professional luncheon. Thank you, all of you, for your excellent questions and for making this a very successful Sakai, and thank you also to our speaker, who more than anyone else contributed to it. And it was very lively, and we'd like to have Philippe back, so we're going to give him yet another 1-year honorary membership, which is, of course, the only reason he comes to Japan. Thank you.
Well, it's going to be very useful, hopefully, in the coming months. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much.